thanks for joining us for Communicating Community Benefits of Utility Scale Renewables, presented by Lion Energy. Today, our lovely moderator, Mariah Lynn, who is the founder of Good Steward Consulting and a Renew Wisconsin board member since 2021. Will be the moderator for the day, and we'll be introducing all of our lovely speakers. I unfortunately have to go, but I hope you all enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Alex. And thank all of you for coming and joining us today. I think this will be a very interesting discussion. Thank you to Alliant, our sponsor, for the breakout session, which I will be very clear. They sponsored a breakout session, not necessarily this breakout session. So Rick did not buy his spot on this panel. Just FYI, he earned it. So building public trust is a key part of renewable energy development. In this panel, we're going to explore the ways in which communities, organizations, communication professionals are finding success in developing acceptance of utility-scale renewable energy projects. As Alex said, my name's Mariah Lynn. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Good Steward Consulting. Shameless pitch, come see our booth out in the expo area. With me today, I have Deborah Dingus, who is Director of Tax Research at SER, Strategic Economic Research. Deborah is, an economic consulting firm supporting utility-scale renewable energy projects across the U.S. That's SER. She leads SER's tax research and focuses on tax treatment, incentives, and host community payment structures, providing analysis for energy projects, project reports, and testimony support. She has a master's degree in taxation from the University of Cincinnati and over 6 years of tax experience supporting energy projects. So please help me welcome Deborah.
Thank you, Mariah. Good morning, everyone. So, and you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. Thank you. So from my perspective, I'll be focused on the fiscal and economic impacts. So you can think of that as the money story. That's how I tend to look at it. So communities don't just want to hear that there's benefits, that they want to know that a project's benefits, they want to understand how those benefit dollars translate over into benefits for the community and how they flow. So one thing that is helpful is looking at the different benefits, the money that flows, the different layers as different buckets. So not all lumped in together, just as if they were all into one big money pot of tax money, sort of say. And so that developers aren't over-promising with their projects. So for the first bucket, you'll see that's regarding benefits that are more statutory. Think about that as benefits that are law-driven, specifically with property taxes. That includes property tax rules and regulations. Different communities will have different laws, regulations, and implications regarding taxes. That also includes utility aid payments, different structured payments from the state, depending on classification and the project design details. The second bucket you'll see up there is regarding negotiated agreements between the developers and the communities. So think of that as your joint development agreements between the developers and the community decision holders, host community payments, tailored to local priorities. So when you think of this bucket, think of the actual contract itself, what the developer and the community both agree to, depending on voluntary agreements that they can enter into regarding the renewable projects. And these, of course, depend on what the community is looking for, what they're prioritizing, whether it be essential services such as roads, infrastructure, school, things like that. And then the third bucket is what myself and my colleagues at SER focus on the most, and that's modeled economic impacts. So think of this as the estimates before the project goes into service. This is very important because it shows how the dollars that flows into the project is modeled, and how that turns into jobs, outputs, local spending in the community as a result of the renewable energy project, indirect induced impacts as well. So it's important to understand that things can change, the different variables depending on the project design and of course the timeline. And every project is different, every developer is different, again, every community is different. So it's important to be able to understand what's guaranteed versus what is assumed. So once you understand the three buckets that community benefits the dollars can flow into, it's also important to, from our opinion, to apply three credibility rules. So the first one is don't double count across buckets. Specifically what that means is make sure that you're able to clearly define the different benefit dollars, whether that be utility aid payments versus standard property tax structure, versus other agreements that the developer might go into with the community. So having those buckets clearly defined ensures that the developer doesn't overpromise and that the community isn't asking or isn't spreading misinformation or having confusion regarding what the developer promised, what the project can bring to the community. The second rule is to clearly label, kind of as I alluded to earlier, clearly label what is guaranteed versus what's estimated. Again, talking about the project variables, depending on the project timeline, things can change at any time. So it's important to really focus on the variables and be very transparent to the community about those variables and how those can change. Especially regarding estimates. A lot of times the community sees certain numbers, and again, it's important not to overpromise. So it's important, at least from our side, from what the company I work for, what we do, we are very conservative at the early stages of the development process. We're conservative in our assumptions in order not to overpromise, because that also kills community trust. So that's very important in the beginning to have that community trust. And then the third is regarding timing. So the community wants to know not only what the benefits means in terms of translating that into dollars, but they want to know, when does the revenue stream start? Who gets what, whether it's schools, EMS, what portion of those dollars are allocated to who, and how much of that money is guaranteed. So that's very important as well. So pretty much in my experience, from going to open houses regarding renewable energy projects, testimonies, communities don't necessarily distrust the project itself. They distrust unclear numbers. So when you show where the money goes, when it arrives, how much certainty there is, then the trust goes up, and then you can handle any misinformation that can arrive. So as you can see that in at the bottom, typical project timeline. So we always encourage developers to have the conversations with communities early. That way they can be proactive, get ahead of any misconceptions, be able to explain to the community that there are variables and there are estimates, and kind of be more proactive in explaining the revenue stream, whether it be through utility aid payments or standard property tax treatment.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rick Zimmerman. Rick Zimmerman is the Senior Manager of Resource Development for Alliant Energy. He joined the company in 2014. Rick began his career at Alliant in the Project Controls Office as a project consultant and manager. Throughout his 23 years of construction experience, Rick has held multiple roles, each with increasing levels of leadership and responsibility. Rick has been providing support for the development of Alliant Energy's generation, primarily renewable resources, since 2019. The development team advances a portfolio of various technologies to support future investments with wind, solar, storage, and natural gas. Alliant Energy's growth of the generation portfolio requires an active renewable developer partnership network. The development team secures project options, engages in commercial negotiations, and initiates tax credit qualification strategies. Through Rick's efforts and team execution, Alliant Energy has had a predictable pipeline of projects that have successfully navigated local, state, and regulated permitting, as well as forged new relationships with countless customers and communities as they engage in outreach related to their expanding investments. In 2025, Rick was named Senior Manager of Resource Development, and welcome, Rick.
Yeah, thanks, Mariah, and thanks for inviting me to this panel. I won't go through all the points here of who Alliant Energy is, but generally, we're a utility. We're broken under two identities that are recognizable in between the two states. So we're Wisconsin Power and Light. That covers our service territory that's up on the slide here in Wisconsin. And then we're also interstate Power and Light, both referred to as WPL and IPL, and it's not Iowa Power and Light like you'd think it might be, but it's interstate. In between the two states, since about 10 years ago, we have successfully developed and now have in generation over a gigawatt of wind in between the two states and over a gigawatt of solar between the two states. And in fact, we're about a gigawatt and a half. And still have goals to develop more of each. We just put in 3 4-hour batteries in the recent year, so we got 274 megawatts of 4-hour duration, 2 here in Wisconsin and 1 in Iowa. So thanks, looking forward to a good discussion today.
Absolutely. Do you want to go through your second slide, or? Well, you just encapsulated all of that, so that's great. Thank you. All right. And next we have Diane Meyerfeld, who is Outreach Specialist for UW-Madison Extension. Diane is the Principal Investigator for a 3-year grant from the U.S. Department of Energy to work on community engagement around large-scale renewable energy. The project is working in depth with 3 counties and a tribal nation and is using what they learn from those counties to provide resources that communities can use statewide. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this panel. And yes, thank all of you for coming. So as Mariah mentioned, Extension received this grant from the Department of Energy. And so we're coming at this from a slightly different direction, which is we are working with the communities and kind of coming at it from the community viewpoint. And these communities, I was just speaking to Rick about this before the panel got started. This is very new for them. This is a complex landscape. There's a ton of information for them to understand. And they're dealing with all their usual problems, and then this comes on top. So our goal is to try to help them navigate this landscape. I want to do a shout out to Greene County, and Victoria Solomon is here. She's the Extension County Educator. So one of our strengths as Extension, we're affiliated with the university, but we have educators who work in and are responsible to most of the counties around the state. We worked with Greene County to hone our engagement process, and as you can see, it's quite extensive. So we started out working with the county educator to figure out who are the key people to talk to in the county, whether they are people employed by the county, local officials, or whether they're business leaders or environmental leaders or other groups. And then we talked to them as a whole, and we got their advice on who are the other key people we need to talk to. And then from there, we did a mapping workshop. This is not something we do with every community, but it was very helpful to get in-depth input from people on how they look at their county and where they see opportunity for renewable energy and where they have concerns. And then the big thing, the public-facing thing, is a community conversation for everyone in the community. Right now, we are wrapping up trying to address all of the questions we got from, and these are, hundreds of comments, questions, and concerns that we received. And these are, again, complex issues, and we're trying to boil them down into language that will work for the communities. So we focused on solar, simply because when we started this grant, we were in that place where, we saw that in the keynote, where Wisconsin hadn't had new wind projects. Now that's changing, but our capacity is focused on solar to date. We'd love to focus on wind, but we have limited capacity. So here are just a few pictures of how that community engagement looks, how the mapping workshop looks, and the community conversations.
Thank you, Diane. And thank you for stepping up to do that as a member of an industry that is phenomenal to be a part of. The awareness and the community engagement, the discussions and the conversations are so necessary. Having another voice at those tables and the research that you're doing, the study that you're doing, is extremely valuable. So thank you for taking on that challenge. I'm excited to keep following it. So with that, I'm going to go through some questions for the panel. And then after the questions that I propose to the table, I'm going to open it up for questions from all of you. I'm not going to participate in the answers to the panel questions, but I will participate in the answers to the questions from the audience. The background that I bring to the panel today is we do public outreach and community engagement on utility scale 100 megawatt and greater wind, solar, and battery storage projects. Good Steward Consulting, the company that I work for, was founded 10 years ago. We're actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. And we have experience on over 115 projects across 26 states. In Wisconsin here alone, Good Steward Consulting has been involved in over 80% of the permitted utility scale projects that have come online. We've also had experience in over 4.8 gigawatts of wind, solar, and battery energy storage in the state of Wisconsin. I have been yelled at by thousands and thousands of Wisconsin citizens. So happy to share some of those insights with you after as well. All right. So to get us started here, Diane, I'm going to pitch this one to you. How do you or does your organization go about learning what resonates with each community?
And I will reframe that a little bit, because our purpose is not to sell a project to a community. Our purpose is to learn in a holistic way what are the community's goals and what are their concerns, so that we can help them plan in a way that will best allow them to meet their goals and minimize their concerns. So I went over that process. Really, the perception that Extension, and the reality that Extension is a neutral party, that we don't have an interest on one side or the other, is kind of foundational. And the relationships we have by virtue of having someone who works in that county, often multiple people who work in that county. So we might have a community development educator who works with local government and the economic sector. We might have an agriculture or several agricultural educators who work with farmers. So, and as well as other people. So that's foundational. And I would say really setting up working through those local connections to find out who we need to listen to is the critical part, and taking all those concerns seriously. Yes, sometimes we hear concerns or questions or even benefits that are founded on an incomplete understanding.
Yeah.
These are really complex things, and there is a lot of incomplete or inaccurate information out there. But instead of dismissing them, understanding that those are real concerns and addressing them is key.
Absolutely. And so would that be the mapping portion of your process then, Diane?
It's the mapping portion. No, it's really the whole thing.
Sure.
So it's those conversations, just starting with that advisory group, all the way through the public community conversation. And what we found, and I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to many of you in the audience, is that 80-90% of the things are widely held, including some of the ones that are based on misinformation.
Sure.
The challenge is the answers are not always easy. So we held these conversations in Greene County, and we held them at the end of last June, and it has taken us until now to write a report that succinctly and in clear language answers those main concerns that were brought up in a way that is accurate and understandable. And sometimes we still don't have answers because I think the answers just aren't clear.
Sure. Wonderful. Thank you. Rick or Deborah, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add, well, appreciate all the work that you do, because we do move into a community that we've already identified that would be, a good candidate to develop solar or wind or place battery or in fact gas, now that we're looking at that with our increased loads. So we've already identified and did some legwork. And it usually is we're following transmission lines, and that's really no secret from the development world. And then we get away from the cities, right? Because land generally is expensive, so we get into the rural areas. And even though we're there to kind of pitch our project, a lot of times when we first interact, right, even before we start knocking on doors and contacting landowners, we go to the public officials and say, hey, we're going to be in your area, right? And this is what we think we'd like to do, but if we don't have the participation, we won't be doing it. Or we won't be doing it as big, or maybe we go a little bigger because we do have a lot of acceptance in the community and landowner participation. So unfortunately, we come to them and we have very little information because we're not even sure if there will be a project. But we end up educating the community because, right, all their concerns from just our conversations, like, what about this? Oh, well, that's only partly true. And here's what it is. So we get to more of an education role in our interactions with the community. And it's sometimes tough to pull out that, really, what is your base concern? And it's rooted in, unfortunately, some social media that is quick to and easy to send out some disinformation. And it's also hard, who do you trust, right? Obviously, we have an agenda. We'd like to add generation. So, can you believe us? Luckily, we have groups such as Good Stewards and what the UW Extension is doing to help educate the community, and that's the biggest piece that we see.
Voices.
Yep.
Multiple voices at the table. Great, thank you. Rick, let's keep it with you. How do you typically frame JDAs and utility aid payments?
Yeah, so let's take the utility aid payments because that's the easy part.
Yep.
So generally with projects that are utility size, that is the majority of what we do, although we do some smaller solar community type projects too. But that's already in Wisconsin, state laws and statutes that are already set that we just follow. So similar to what Deborah had said, that kind of helps the community understand because it's tax season now. And just like any government law, they're not clear until you reread and read it again and then have someone explain it to you. And then you bat it around a little bit more like, oh, okay, now that starts making sense. So for our large utility projects that create generation, and currently today, batteries do not create generation, right? They store power. We're trying to advocate within the state government to also have this program apply to that, but it doesn't right now. It was created before battery storage was even kind of considered, or any storage. So generally speaking, for solar, wind, gas project that creates generation, the utility, what they call shared revenue program in Wisconsin, for every megawatt, we have to pay in $5,000 to the state. Now, they administer this program, so we do not write checks out to the local community directly from a shared revenue. The state administers that, and that payments really don't start happening until a year or a half a year. There's some, if you get it done before, I think it's June or July, then the payments start here. If you're after that, then the payments don't start until a year later. But it is basically while we generate, we have to pay $5,000 a megawatt, and typically our projects are 100 megawatts or larger. So it's significant money. It's an annual payment. It depends on where that generation is specifically located, depends on how that money gets divvied up. It's between the county and either the town or township, depends on how big it is and what's its incorporation. It can be a city also. It's usually a 1/3 to the towns and cities and 2/3 to the county, and that changes again depending on exactly what that municipality is and the size of that. So it's significant, and it's annual, it's every year, and it's irregardless of if the sun is shining and we're generating, or it's a cloudy day and we're not generating as much. It is still based off of the nameplate of the project. And those payments typically don't end until that project doesn't exist anymore. So like we decommission it, we pull it up. If we repower, those payments continue. So most of our projects, solar, wind, we're between 20-year lifespan for solar, 30-year lifespan for wind, and we typically think we're going to repower those. So this is some significant money that flows into the community from these projects. And it's up to the communities on how they want to spend the money, right? This is not directed by the state of 3% needs to go here and 4% needs to go there and another 5% goes to the schools. This is completely at the counties and cities, townships that receive this, discretionary, how they want it. It gets added to their budget and they can allocate accordingly. So that was the easy part. The other one then is the JDA, or Joint Development Agreement, right? It comes by a bunch of different names. Operating agreements is another name. But basically what this is, if we do projects above 100 megawatts in Wisconsin, the agency that is in charge of permitting is the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin, called PSCW. So although there are certain smaller permits that we have to pull from the communities, basically the permitting, the permitting responsibility is taken away from that local community, right? And it's not taken away, it's just handled by the PSCW. So the JDAs we look like is, all right, here is a chance for the local communities to have your voice. So what is your concerns, right? That the PSCW may not address. Like they don't enter in or require that we have road use agreements. For solar, more for wind, because just the large volume of trucks and the weight of those trucks, right? We're in rural communities, a lot of roads that either are paved or unpaved, we create some damage. We just have a lot of weight and a lot of loads coming through. So that's obviously a concern in the communities. Like, you're going to beat up our roads. Who pays for that? We'll enter into an agreement that says we will pay for that. We will take, it used to be a video, like we ride down every road, we videotape it. Now it's done by drones, but we basically videotape everything. We welcome the community to be with us. So usually it's, their lead of roads or maintenance. And they're like, yeah, here it is. This is your condition. We will bring it back to or better. And we'll have a picture. And then we do it again at the end of the project. We also will place security. Like, hey, here's $5,000. If we don't repair it in the time that you feel is adequate, you can go ahead and repair it yourself and pull from that kitty. We believe we're going to be pretty responsive. We want to be responsive. But if we don't, here's your security blanket. So that's what the JDAs typically include. What doesn't the PSCW include? So where's your voice? And sometimes it's operating hours. Sometimes like it's how do we work around school buses come through, right? And large loads and small kids and school buses, they don't necessarily combine well. So we're like, all right, that's your route during that time. We won't take it. And it's a contract. We both sign it. It's easily to pass it from one contractor to the next. Our development department will often agree and execute those. We pass it to our construction group. Well, they have some written set of rules of what we agreed to as our commitments. They also include like decommissioning. It's spoken in the PSCW contract, but often the communities say, well, Line Energy, what happened if you're not here in 20 years or 30 years? What, are you going to, is that just going to rust in the field? And we're like, no, we'll post security. So there is a certain amount of money that's sitting there that if we're not around, that can, the community can draw on that to do it. And we have to have a third-party study of how much that will cost, so we can align those costs. So what we're trying to do is alleviate the community from any unadditional cost impacts because of our project coming to town. Those should be borne by us. We want those to be borne by us. And then here's a JDA, Joint Development Agreement, that here's your voice. So what's your concerns? Now, we've worked with several communities. We just can't reach agreement. Like, no, that is way too much money. We can't afford to do that because, right, who pays for these projects? It's our customer base. So we're very conscious then of how we spend our customers' money. And sometimes we just don't reach agreement. We tried, but we failed. But in most times we like to enter in those agreements, and if both parties are reasonable and like, yep, that is a concern, but we can work around that, and this is how we're going to do it. Let's put it on some paper.
Absolutely. Good. Deborah, Diane, either of you have anything to add to that?
I think that was great, and I learned some stuff about what Alliant is doing. I think one of the things that we have struggled with, and the Center for Land Use Education, which is also part of University of Wisconsin Extension, is planning to put out information about this, is just to learn what can go into joint development agreements across Wisconsin. And so we're really looking forward to being able to share that information with local communities so they have a better sense of what's realistic and what they can ask for.
Yeah, and Diane, prior to this, we were having some conversations pre-panel, and you had made a comment about how it's different in other states, like adjoining states have different requirements. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about this specific conversation is that sometimes we know what we know, we don't understand that there are things we don't know. So if you're here, it's your first time to renew and you're not familiar with Wisconsin, it's important to understand that these are those rules and those standards in this state. My home state taxation is completely different in Minnesota. We tax on generation, and the split is different. So it's important to know all of those requirements and, again, those expectations, what the norm is, and that's really where we're focusing. So love these voices. We are going to go a little bit faster now. Deborah, I've got one that I'm really interested in your response on. What is most often the most difficult aspect of the development process as it relates to your communication efforts?
Yeah, so with my experience attending community open houses, for example, when community residents want to learn more about the project, communities and residents, they want certainty early. So being able to clearly define project assumptions, estimates, and again, developers not over-promising, being able to back up their assumptions is very important. Another thing is property taxes and just payment structures in general are very, very complex. Again, it varies from community to community, state by state. And a lot of times, understandably, developers, they're not in front of a big tax book every day. That's not their world, so to say. So sometimes they don't get the whole picture. So it's very important to be proactive, to have those early on conversations with communities, to be able to explain to them the payment structure and whether or not there are JDAs in place or any other incentives or benefits for the community. So just how complex property taxes are in general and being able to get that out in front of the community, especially early on in early conversations, I find that's been the most difficult part regarding communicating.
I have kind of a second half to that question, which is how do you respond to the misinformation around that? Because it is really complex, and somebody can hold on to one number that they hear from someone, and that number can go across an entire community.
Oh, absolutely.
And then you're hearing this misinformation. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so we focus on verifiable information, especially myself being on the tax side, being able to have numbers to back it up, even if they're estimates, while again, reassuring the community that estimates, assumptions can change over time. These are variables in a project. So just being able to explain the math, explain it in plain English. And for me, I also go back to my primary sources, whether that be looking at the law, looking at specific legislation statutes. So for Wisconsin, the Department of Revenue. Things are changing all the time, especially with the emergence of data centers and as Rick was talking about with battery storage coming up. So guidance is emerging every day from decision makers, from the IRS even. So just being able to, again, be proactive and get in front of community concerns, being able to show how that money is going to flow into the community will really help build that community trust and help misinformation before it even starts.
Absolutely. I'm going to skip a couple of questions that we were kind of talking about, and I'm going to ask one final question, and then I'm going to open it up. And Diane, I'm going to ask it of you. Based on your experience, what is your ideal scenario or timeline for developing a solid foundation for community relations?
Well, the ideal would be long before there's a project. And from our perspective, the ideal would be a community thinking, going through their own engagement process to figure out what are their concerns, what are their priorities before a development process happens. The reality is communities, local officials, local staff, they have their hands full. They're often not going to do this process until they see something on the horizon. So I really appreciated what Rick said about going and talking to local officials as the first step, because we've certainly heard rumors that there are many communities where local officials were not informed. And they found out when the rumor mill told them that landowners were being approached. That's not a good scenario.
Worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario. Yes. Thank you. With that, we have a little bit of wiggle room. So noon is when lunch is going to start. It's a little before noon right now. So I'd like to take a few minutes of questions. If anybody out there has a question for the panel, great. Hold on, I'll switch mics. They gave it to me, so I'll use it.
So I have a question for Rick. I don't think so.
You have to talk loud.
I have a question for Rick and a question for Diane. Okay, so I happen to be from Kentucky, and within the last 90 days, I read a newspaper article that a Kentucky legislator from a rural area said, solar farms are a garbage dump. And my question to you is, how would you go about having a viable project when you're starting out with that kind of background? And then to Diane, it seems like you did a very enlightened process in Greene County, and I'm curious as to what commissioned that process coming about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Were you able to hear all that?
Yes. Yep. Good question. Yeah, that's a tough place to start from. So really we look at, do we have other options? Right. And so if we do, right, we sometimes pivot. However, if we don't, and right, it just good locations, there's not like every location out in Wisconsin. And we get that all the time. Why don't you build it on a garbage dump? Why don't you put it on brownfield? And for certain reasons, there's not a lot of brownfield, thankfully. So we're forced. I don't want to say forced, but we decide to make the attempt to go in there, even though we know we're going to hit some headwinds. Here in Wisconsin, right, if we're going into locally and we know our project's going to be over 100, some of your power is actually taken away from you because, as I mentioned before, it goes to the state from a permitting perspective. Not a great way to start with a relationship, though, right? So we try to just get in there and like, all right, so where's your concerns? Where are you getting your impression that these are garbage dumps? Because in fact, we can pencil this out. This is best for our customers versus building wind or putting a new gas plant. It lines up really well, and then we obviously start highlighting all the community benefits where we shared before. So maybe Diane, if you want to take it from there.
All right, well, I'll address your second question. Well, we're very grateful to have received grant funding, which gave us the capacity to do this. And then it goes back to those relationships that Extension has, those long-standing relationships that Extension has with the counties. We talked to multiple county educators across the state, and some of them didn't want to do this because they perceived it as controversial, and they didn't want to open up this difficult conversation in their county. Victoria Solomon, and who's sitting here, she saw this as an opportunity to work with her local leaders, and she had those excellent relationships, and she made the case that they would benefit from learning about this process and being prepared.
Great question. I left the mic right there for anybody that would like to ask a question. Please feel free. Thank you.
Hi. So I hear from people who aren't interested in one of these in their backyard that they're ruining our beautiful farmland. And that means the conversation is immediately polarized. It's solar or agriculture. How do we advance the notion of agrivoltaics? And I know there's a little research project out in Stoughton. Too little, too late, too slow. How do you change the conversation that it can be both and it does not have to be either or?
Sure. Rick, if you don't mind, I'll answer this one first. Okay. This is a common first reaction in especially utility scale solar, right? We do see it in wind, right? Because you're taking an acre and a half out per turbine, and there's 100 turbines, that's 100 acres. We could be growing corn or soybeans. It's important to frame those conversations as we don't have to, with solar, we don't have to sacrifice progress. We can achieve progress and preservation at the same time. So we need to be talking about the fact that when we convert row crop farm ground from agriculture to harvesting the sun, the land remains the landowners, the farmers. A lot of times it's covering a generational gap where this is helping that farm family retain ownership of that ground. It's letting the ground sit and rest. The deep-rooted native vegetative ground cover is helping with soil nutrition, right? It's helping with retention. It has so many benefits even before we apply agrivoltaics. Agrivoltaics does take a long time because we have to understand that there are constraints. These are solar panels that we're trying to integrate agriculture with, which are very expensive, and that, quite frankly, we're relying on that power plant to power. And anything that could get in the way of that utility scale generation is risking reliability, right? But we've seen a lot of different great advances in agrivoltaics, whether it's with livestock or with growing vegetables under the panels, things of that nature. Worldwide, it is something that is pushing forward, I think, more quickly today than it was years ago. But it's about framing the conversation that this isn't taking out row crop farm ground that somebody else has control of. That farmer owns that ground, and that farmer is making a conscious decision to sign a lease agreement that, again, is not permanent. That's what they want to do with their ground for that term. And again, a lot of times it's saving that family from having to sell farm ground for other types of development. So focusing on solar at the utility scale as a temporary land use. Yes, it's 30 years, but it's actually temporary. We're not putting a Dollar General on your 5 acres that will always be paved, right? We're doing something that can then be taken out when we can go back to row crop farming. So we're actually saving agriculture through that land use. Rick?
Yeah, completely agree. The only thing I'll quick add, it always usually comes down to cost. So it's taller panels, so you can farm underneath there. So more steel in the ground, more wind. So, right, we are cost conscious of when we build because it is, we push that down into our rates. So I think it is coming. We just introduced sheep at one of our first of 12 solar sites here in Wisconsin from help control the vegetation. So, right, typical mowing we're doing at the other 11, and we're trying sheep. So we're slowly bringing it in. We have another agrivoltaics program in Iowa with Iowa State University. So I think once we can kind of prove that, hey, there can be additional like production underneath the panels, then maybe the cost savings is like instead of paying more for the solar panels, or excuse me, for the racking to get a little taller, we're paying a little bit less from the land because the farmers can now turn another profit because they can farm underneath there. So I think it's slowly coming, but maybe not fast enough.
Yeah, so the notion about letting your land lie fallow and recover versus the long-term cost of mining the soil and mining the aquifer, which is what row crops do, is that an argument that you make?
Diane?
I'm going to address this. Before I worked in this renewable energy stuff, I worked on sustainable agriculture. So this is an area that's near and dear to my heart. I would start by saying, I think developers can do more. I think sheep has been proven. The solar grazing, as you mentioned, doesn't require you to raise the racking, doesn't require that additional expense. It does require thinking during the construction process about not disturbing the soil unnecessarily, and it does require making sure the wiring is installed in a way that isn't waving at the sheep saying, chew on me, right? We actually are putting out a little checklist, which should be out, I hope, by the end of the month, which is just a little checklist of, if you're a solar developer, things to think about to make solar grazing work, and if you're a farmer, things to think about to make solar grazing work. It doesn't go into detail, but it's just raising that up.
I love that.
I would say about the soil fallow, this is an area where we come at it neutrally and not from a pro perspective. Don't overstate that. Those, first of all, if you have planted long-rooted, deep-rooted native vegetation throughout your entire site and not just around the edges to make it look pretty, yes, that's good for the soils. But remember, you have 2 construction projects going on. That's super hard on the soil, the construction project when you're putting them in and the construction when you're decommissioning. So don't tell a farmer that corn is terrible and that 2 construction projects are going to restore your soil.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point. You know, we say that a lot because when people come to us with, I want to see the row crop farming, right? I want to look out over corn and soybeans, right? But when you are a landowner, when you are an agricultural producer, your soil is something that, I mean, we get to the point where I've tasted our soil before because you know what's in that. And you're right, the compaction that happens during construction and during decommissioning will be hard on it. So I appreciate that perspective. Absolutely.
And absolutely, the water quality benefits of, again, if you are doing those native species and are not applying fertilizers and herbicides, you know, over the length of the project, those are real and communities acknowledge them. But just always be careful that you really are saying things that are real.
Yeah, and it's the commitment, right? Like you had put in there, do not double, right? And you want to be very realistic in the expectation. And I agree with you. And if you have a utility scale solar farm that is only doing deep-rooted native vegetation on the outside, please call me because I would like to call them. Wonderful. We have time for one more, and then we'll stay around for a few minutes too. Please.
Okay, yep, I have a question. First, I appreciate your discussion of agrivoltaics. My question is kind of on the other side of that, also related to siting, but sometimes these projects are not sited on farmland. We have a recent project where it was sited on woodland. I believe it's around multiple thousand acres of woodland. There's another that was grassland. So intact habitat, deep roots, as well as already protecting groundwater, already absorbing carbon. So I guess my question is, what is your take on siting solar either on those intact forests or intact grasslands or adjacent so that they're kind of penning in, for instance, next to a state wildlife area? If you put a fence up along the edge, you've effectively reduced the habitat of that state wildlife area. So I'm interested in the take on those.
Sure. Rick?
Yeah, great question. So from woodland perspective, generally, right, we try to leave them in place. Sure, we do some tree trimming, some property line tree, I'll say cutting down, but it's individual trees instead of bunch. However, we do have a solar project, it's in Wood County, of which we did, it was a little over 800 acres, of which we did clear cut that off. Now, this was planted to be harvested. Now, we were, I think, about 10 years early, but this woods that had been planted was planted as a cash crop for timber. So, in fact, we cut it down. The timber that was of age, we sent, or the company we hired sent to a law mill. So we try to avoid that. We don't want to deforest Wisconsin. We don't want to deforest Iowa, Minnesota, where we do have our facilities. So we try to avoid that unless it is already intended to be removed. And we were just there a little bit early for that. For the grasslands, I'm trying to recall if we had a lot of that, but I'd go with the odds saying that we may have. We try to be protective. We do, well, the state requires us, and a lot of the permitting requires us already to do environmental studies of all kinds. Right, is this a environmentally sensitive corridor? We have to stay out of that. And if that grassland is such that it promotes certain vegetation, certain animals that thrive in there, right, we avoid those areas. They're highlighted, and we do not build in there, and we try not to impact any of the animals or vegetation that is a part of that.
One of the benefits of Wisconsin state siting rules is there are other states, counties, where there is no requirement for environmental studies. There are complete Wild West counties and states out there where you do not have to do that. It is a feather in the cap of the state of Wisconsin that they are analyzing that environmental impact and the change to land use. With that, I feel like a teacher and you're all waiting to go to your lunch. So I want to give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you. Great job. And thank you all for joining us. Again, we'll be around for a few minutes, or if you have any follow-up questions, our contact information is available on the app and on the website. So thank you.